So because some of the most creative work, some of the most enterprising, entrepreneurial thinking is happening in all different sectors and all different angles, this group gives you a little bit of a cross-section. So Imtiaz Patel is the CEO of the brand new Baltimore Banner. Congratulations on your launch. He's a former Dow Jones and Wall Street Journal executive. Irving Washington is the outgoing CEO of the Online News Association and a board member of the American Journalism Project, now starting an exciting new role at the Kaiser Family Foundation. And Elizabeth Hansen, my former colleague at Shorenstein, is the founder and CEO of the National Trust for Local News, a really interesting, inventive way to approach the preservation of local journalism and local ownership of local news. So, Imtiaz, let me start with you with the banner, and then we'll sort of pull the lens out a bit. But can you help us understand the ownership structure of the banner and how that works?
Yeah, we are a nonprofit. So the banner is owned by the Venezuelan Institute for Local Journalism. We kind of took our model from Lenfest. And basically, it's funded by Stuart Bainham, but it's a nonprofit. The banner is a brand, essentially, fully owned by the Institute.
And you decided that you would go with a subscriber model versus a membership model, which is an interesting decision. Tell us how that.
Yeah, we debated this for a really long time, and our hypothesis is our model is different, right? What we've decided to do is really scale up on the front end, hoping that the audience will catch up with us at some point and make us sustainable. That's not a given, but that's the assumption, that's a model that we've gone with. And we really fundamentally believe at scale, memberships will not pay for the size of newsroom that we want. And we believe that the size of newsroom is really directly related to the potential impact we could have. That's why we want a large newsroom. That's why, and we want to serve all communities, not just certain communities, because that's been part of the challenge in local news, right? They don't serve everyone. So we want to serve everyone. So we thought the best way to go is, I think I stole this line from Chris at Lion, revenue promiscuity. So lots of different forms of revenue. And, you know, when I look at the local market and look at the other media establishments that are getting member subscriptions or member payments, they're getting $75 a year on average. That will not sustain us. I needed to set a value for what our content is worth, and the only way to do that is subscription. Now, subscription does not mean a transactional relationship. We are working on plans for broader community engagement and things like that. So it's really like a membership model, but with a set price.
But I totally get the point about, in order to cover everyone and have the size newsroom we want and do the kind of important accountability, investment, investigative journalism that communities need, you need a certain size. On the other hand, one of the real equity issues that so many communities face is people who can afford to pay for news and people who can't. And you have this division growing all over the country of people who have access to good information and people you don't. So how do you decide, for instance, what stories should be publicly available and what stories should not be?
So we're approaching this problem in a couple of ways. So yes, certain stories will be made available. Our editor-in-chief and the newsroom's leadership will decide what's really a public good and therefore provide it free. But the other thing we're doing is we totally get that the communities we want to really serve and have an impact with potentially cannot afford what we're offering. Therefore, we are working on a plan right now. We're going to pilot it, and Bill, who's sitting in the audience, is going to kick me probably in the next month, how to provide full access to everything we have for free to certain communities. We're trying to figure out exactly how to do it. We've got a pilot about to start. The other thing we're doing is we're actually providing stories every day, and we've just signed up 3 different publications around the state they can publish our stories for free, no strings attached. So that way we can get broader distribution and get the stories in front of the people that matter. And we have this relationship with our local NPR affiliate, and we're getting stories out through them as well.
Do you see a path to sustainability beyond the subscriber revenue?
Well, I think to be sustainable at the scale that we want, I've modeled out that we need 4 sources of revenue. Subscribers is the largest. My tentative model shows us at about 50% dependent on subscriber revenue. Whether it ends up 40 or 60, it's plus or minus in the 50% range. And that was an actual important rationale behind that, because when you have a product that is so dependent on people paying, you better make sure you are serving the people who are paying as well, and really have a product that is worth paying for. So that was one of the rationales there. The other is ad revenue. We're going to be 20-25% ad revenue. We are also, as a nonprofit, we are looking for others to donate to us whose name is not Bainum. Sustainability now will mean Stuart not having to write me a check every year. And the fourth is, and I think this is the bit that's somewhat different in our model, is we're really an audience monetization platform at the end of the day. I need to build an audience that I can monetize in alternative ways. Subscriptions and ad revenue alone will not support the model. I need to create adjacent products that I can monetize the audience that's coming to us for news as well. So that's what drives sustainability.
Elizabeth, at the National Trust, you have focused on a almost geographically different piece of the problem, which is to say the small community newspapers. And in many cases, when those go away, I mean, if the banner didn't exist, Baltimore would not be a news desert. But in communities where the National Trust is working, it's all or nothing. What made you decide on focusing on legacy community news organizations?
Yeah, so I looked at the news deserts research, and you mentioned the places that are on the verge of becoming news deserts usually have one paper left that's a community weekly. So when I founded the trust, I said, who are those single papers out there? What do they need? Who are they? How can we keep them alive and growing? There's about 4,000 titles left of these community weeklies, about 2,000 owners.
And they're typically not the ones that have been bought up by
typically not the ones that
funds.
have bought up, exactly. So, we think there's about 2,000 independent owners left. And the incredible thing about these papers, well, there's a number of incredible things. So one is, as businesses, they still have revenue. So they still have the car dealerships, and they still have the local pharmacy placing ads in their weekly paper. They have brand recognition. Some of the papers we've been working with have been in, publishing since the 19th century. So there's a real sense of community embeddedness, both in the relationships with advertisers, but also between the publishers and the reporters in the communities. I was in a county last week of 20,000 people, in a county seat that has 8,000 people. This is 2 reporters. One of the reporters is also the publisher. There's an ad salesperson, there's an office manager, and it's these 4 folks covering the county. And we asked them, so when you go to the school board meeting and you write about the new superintendent and he doesn't like it, or you show up at the town council meeting and you're writing about, the training budget that seems to be totally out of proportion with the rest of it, what happens? Do people hate you? Do they come and yell at you? We've seen all kinds of coverage of the kind of threats to journalists. And, the publisher said to me, well, no, sometimes they come in and they say, I'm not subscribing to this paper anymore. Take me off your rolls. And then she said, 2 weeks later, they come back and they plunk down their $150 and they're like, please give me my paper. Because that's the kind of communities that they live in. So, from a kind of community cohesion point of view, from a business point of view, these are not the New York Times, these are not, the Boston Globe, but these are really critical community institutions And the other thing I'll say about them is that, we're buying papers for $50,000, $100,000, some of them for $5,000. This is a solvable problem. When we looked at the size of the ecosystem and ran the numbers, I think we could buy all the remaining community news titles and prevent the spread of news deserts for $300 million. So it's really, it is within reach. And that's why I'm so excited about this part of the ecosystem.
And is your goal to, by virtue of their now being part of your organization, to either help them find economies of scale
Yes.
or operate differently?
Yeah.
What is the benefit to them of being part of sort of this consortium?
Yeah, so let me talk a little bit about our model. So we like to think of ourselves as the Nature Conservancy for small local newspapers. So what we're doing in a handful of states is building new nonprofit organizations that can acquire these papers and turn them into nonprofits. And obviously, as Imtiaz was saying, that opens up all kinds of new avenues for revenue. But what it also does is it brings down the cost of doing business. It brings down the cost of producing the news. So instead of having, 5 circulation people, you can have 1 or 2. Instead of having 6 layout people, you can have 1 or 2. And all of that means that then more resources can get put back into the journalism. And I'll just say that, these community journalists work for almost nothing. I mean, they're making like $20,000 and $30,000 a year covering their communities. So a little bit of extra resources goes a really long way.
When you launched the Colorado News Conservancy, which was, 24
titles?
24 titles.
Yes.
This goes back to our first panel about funders not having it necessarily in their DNA to collaborate. God knows newsrooms don't have it in their DNA to collaborate. How much cultural transition have you needed to implement to get them to, go down to like one person doing layout across?
Yeah, and I'm really grateful to have some of our supporters of the Colorado News Conservancy here at Colorado Health Foundation and the Gates Family Foundation. We are in the stage now of expanding the Conservancy to bring in other titles. So what we've learned in the first year of working with these 24 is just having a new ownership structure where you come in and say, what you're doing is important. What you're doing isn't important to your communities. It's also important to showing the future of local news. That makes a huge difference for people's motivation and willingness to change and try new things. So I was in Colorado visiting our newsroom a couple of weeks ago, and it feels like a totally different place. People really feel engaged and excited, and they want to know what's next. They want to take on what's next.
So now to pull back one step further, Irving, can you help us understand how venture philanthropy approaches this differently as the sort of larger field building enterprise and the approach that you've been thinking about and taking?
Yeah, happy to. I'm currently on the board of AJP, and I've been on the founding board since 2019, and I think the incredible thing to me to see is that really how the mission has evolved to being a leader in catalyzing the growth of local nonprofit news. I think your presentation showed this, and the panel before, I think AJP is really embodying what Eric and John and Vince were talking about, what the vision could be of pulling together resources to really grow the field. So we see sort of 2 premises in terms of launching that mission in the sense that, one, I think everyone in this room would agree that we need more philanthropic dollars into local news. So AJP sees itself as a leader into galvanizing that through national funds, local funds. We've really been, again, what they were talking about on the panel earlier, how can we mobilize that as a collaboration and unit? And then secondly, where we really make a difference is in terms of sustainability, as also your presentation talked about. Our investments focus solely on the sustainability of the organizations that we support. That's on strategic support, business operations support, and even in the state that AJP is in now, and I think in our early grantees, we're seeing some pretty incredible results already. For example, grantees are growing by 70% in year 1 within the portfolio. So that's just a number of things that we're seeing where you really make this kind of investment at that scale, then you really see the growth into the organizations.
Is there a challenge that the organizations that have the best, especially I'm thinking of new nonprofit digital newsrooms, for instance, that it's great that those are starting. They're often starting in markets where they have a reasonable chance of succeeding, which almost by definition means that they're less likely going to be in some remote, rural, underserved area. So I'm wondering how you think about what the role of venture philanthropy is for audiences and in markets that sustainability is going to be a whole lot harder.
That's a great question. I think that you made the point earlier. We all need to do something sort of different in the space. AJP's portfolio is a mix of variety. So within smaller local markets, larger local markets, starting new nonprofits, and all of that has been sort of reaction to lighting the fire of the need that we're seeing. I think we've seen the numbers here have grown. More people are interested in funding local news, whether that's philanthropic organizations, individuals. So right now, our reaction has been a response to help funnel that need. So it has been in larger markets. But essentially, we also see that there's a model that's going to be created that as we're taking the lessons from launching these new projects, that can be replicated to rural markets, to smaller markets as well, too. But we're all in this field discovering it out now.
Can you talk about HAP and the Cleveland Foundation and how that experiment, and Houston, but how those have worked and what other areas might learn?
Yeah, I think Cleveland, Houston, Wichita, essentially, again, what we're doing is we are responding to the need, where AJP, this is how AJP's mission is.
I don't think of Houston as a news desert.
No, but one of the things AJP does do is that there's extensive work in terms of going in. A lot of people don't know that AJP goes in and kind of looks into the market of what that local news ecosystem looks like and where there could be value add. I think, again, to your point earlier, we're all stronger when there's multiple varieties of news outlets serving a variety of different people in those markets. So when philanthropists come to AJP or other individuals or organizations interested, we do that research and then we take a look to see where is some value add, and that's how those projects are really starting.
I'm curious to hear from all three of you about whether in the conversations you're having, it feels as though one of the missions that many people here are undertaking is for people to just think completely differently about journalism as a civic institution, like the way you might think about your local hospital or library or museum, that you need to think about journalism as something that place-based philanthropies need to support. And I don't know if it's because so many people still carry in their heads an image of media barons who are just coining money, owning networks or newspapers or whatever, but that I'm wondering what it takes to shift the mentality among local philanthropists. Because sometimes it seems like the larger national ones are the ones that have been leading the way, and you need the most local ones to pick it up and think about a local newspaper or a local news organization the same way they think about the hospital. How does that work? MTS, why don't you?
Yeah, well, so we've been chatting a lot with local funders and philanthropists, and I got to say, it's hard. You know, in a lot of cases, a lot of the local guys, they don't support media. That's not what they invest in. They've got other issues that they're focused on, and that's where their funds are going. So it's a long cycle to try and get them to invest and provide support. You know, what we have to think about, especially in a place like Baltimore, we have to identify who the early adopters are going to be and really use them as a signaling mechanism in a way to say, yes, this is worthwhile supporting. And
then hope it's contagious.
Exactly, because, you know, Baltimore's a small place. We call it Smalltimore for a reason. Everyone is connected. I mean, literally, I'll walk around on the street, I'm like, hey, Imtiaz. I'm like, it's like a really weird place. But you got to get those early, like the influencers, the early adopters, get them to support you, and the others will come in time.
Interesting. Elizabeth?
Yeah, you know, one way that we've thought about approaching this issue is through partnering with strong existing institutions. So I think you probably saw it 2 weeks ago, we announced that we're supporting the acquisition of the Denton Record Chronicle by KERA, which is the public radio and television station in Dallas. And you know, KERA has had those relationships with local philanthropy, individuals and institutions for decades. And so by connecting strong local journalism into those existing institutions that have those relationships, we can make the case and they can make the case in a different kind of way.
Irving, how would you?
I think one of the things that's usually missing from these conversations, the reason why that trust is there is because of people. So when we talk about sustainability, it's the people that we're bringing into the fold. Part of AJP's portfolio, I think 80% of the hires through the portfolio are new to the industry as well. And so I think part of this, when we talk about that, like you're saying, people recognize you, we're funding people. That's where the sustainability happens, and that's a part of this conversation that I think we think about at AJP. On the sustainability side is also funded the editorial side because of the work from the people who are raising money as well. So I think that is the big piece to just remember, and we're talking about sort of this local connection. The reason why those numbers are the way they are is because the people who are in the organizations, and how can we sustain and fulfill, the people have careers within journalism in the local level.
You know, one question, and Elizabeth, you touched on this, but one question that my students who are not US based ask all the time is why the United States doesn't have bigger, stronger public media the way many other countries do. And I'm wondering how each of you thinks public media should or should not fit into the solution set for the problems we're talking about.
Well, I'm really excited about the future of public media, local journalism. We just published some research a couple of weeks ago showing the growing strength of local journalism and public media. In fact, I have a couple of slides. Rashni, maybe you can...
Here, do you want to?
You can put them up here. Yeah, thank you. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but just to kind of hit the highlights. Oh, and I can see them down here too. Great. But somehow it doesn't want to advance. Oh, there we go. So we looked at sustainability and audience capacity and journalistic capacity in the public media system. And I think what's so interesting, you know, the public broadcasting system in the US was really founded to address a market failure, but to address a market failure in broadcasting. So local news was never really part of its mandate. And what's been so incredible, particularly on the public radio side, is to see the growth of local stations into filling this market failure around local news. So one of our co-authors, Mark First, with the support of our friends at Wincoat, looked at how the largest 123 news-focused public radio licensees have been growing over the last decade. And it's really incredible in terms of revenue. Those stations have really outperformed others. They're now at about just over $1 billion in total direct revenue. And you know, we attribute that to this, the growth of local journalism being the kind of service that people want to support. So at these stations, we've also seen a growth in giving, the levels of giving, more sustainers, and it's really, you know, it's a trend that I think is one that we have to build on at the National Trust, that AJP is building on, that I know MTIs, you are building on. So, you know, even though you can see here that public radio licensees are actually supported by a declining share of public funding, and we're already, as you mentioned, very much at the low end of industrialized nations in terms of public support for public broadcasting. This is really a reflection of the fact that for those stations that have taken up the local journalism mantle and provided that kind of service, they're seeing the support coming to them from the public. So, you know, this is, and I'm just going to show one more. This is not just public radio, this is actually across the system we're seeing the growth in journalists. So to me, this is another really exciting area that gives me a lot of optimism and hope for where we can take local journalism, not just in traditional newspapers or digital startups, but actually in our public institutions themselves.
So I guess this points to an opportunity that where there's tremendous potential. Irving, you alluded to opportunities that we might be missing, and I'd be curious to hear from each of you, especially since this is such an extraordinary network of people and relationships who can take ideas and test them and bring them back. So where do you think there are examples that we should be watching more closely, or opportunities that we might not have been seizing that we should be thinking about?
You know, one of the things we've been doing is we talk to everybody, like in the industry, small, big, whatever, to really learn and understand what they're doing, what's working, what isn't working. So, for example, before we launched, as I was putting the business plan together, I spoke with Colorado Sun, Daily Memphian, Lookout Center Crew, Block Club Chicago, The City, and ProPublica, and every other startup you can think of. And we learned something from every single one. It actually changed our model slightly as a result. And I think we need to keep doing that, right? I'm doing things that probably others are not doing, and they could learn from me, and vice versa. I think we need to, as news organizations, just keep getting together and sharing ideas. And there could be something really small in a small community of 10,000 people, and they're doing something to really connect with the community, and we'd benefit from learning about it. So yeah, we got to just get in front of more people and talk to a lot more people.
I think two things on our end. One, the sustainability, investing in the sustainability of newsrooms works. I think AJP's model is proving that. And I think the second thing is collaboration. I think this meeting is all about collaboration, but this really is a moment, particularly local, regionally, nationally, for new ideas to spur and to really follow through on sort of when meetings like this. Don't just let it happen at this panel. We hear this. Really follow through on those collaboration ideas. AJP was built out of that. And so our organizations can thrive on that.
I think there's a ton of opportunity to build small J journalism for small D democracy. I think it's easy to get stuck thinking about big national problems or problems at the state level or problems in big cities. But ultimately, I think our country, as you said, is gonna rise and fall on the embeddedness and connectedness of our communities. And so I think to the extent that we on this stage and the funders in the audience can think about how to support small J journalism. That's not necessarily, the big expose, but that is the kind of like daily meat and potatoes, school board, water board, town council, parade times, in support of small D democracy. I think we can get to a different place in this country.
Do you think that we are, and by we I mean everyone from funders to entrepreneurs to innovators, are thinking broadly and creatively enough about what we mean by media and journalism and delivery system? I'm thinking of like Outlier Media in Detroit, and whether there are technological solutions that we haven't paid enough attention to. I know nothing was more painful than when someone came to me and said, okay, we need to overhaul our CMS, and I'm like, oh my God, how many millions of dollars and how many months of agony is that going to involve? And yet it still feels like so many institutions are having to do for themselves, what is their digital infrastructure and what is their, how are they going to manage just the basics of standing up a newsroom and delivering information to people? Have we underestimated the technological opportunity here for shared resources and ideas?
Definitely. I think the shared resources, shared technologies, new technologies, like it has to be the way forward, but it can't be every newsroom on its own bottom pursuing its own technology choices. It has to be, and I think many funders in the audience have done a fantastic job of encouraging this. It has to be collective effort because there's just sustainability-wise, it just does not make any sense to pursue these solutions individually.
I know we are out of time, and I know that people are going to be coming up to you in our interstitial moments to learn more, but thank you for sharing your ideas, your insights, where you're going in your organizations, and what we all can learn from that. So thank you very much.
Thank you.